Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming up here, like in the afternoon for the most of us, or at least afternoon at some point in the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you so much for coming. And welcome to everybody in the chat. I see so many folks in here that are saying hey from so many different parts of the world. This is so exciting to see here. Thank you for spending some time with us, lunchtime, afternoon, tea time, however you want to call it. My name is Elsie Escobar. I'm the community manager over here at Libsyn. And on this little gathering, this little webinar that we have together, we're going to be talking all about advertising for podcasters. So let's go ahead and say hello to our guest. Say hello to Dave Hanley here. He's the Chief Revenue Officer of AdvertiseCast, and it's the industry's first and largest podcast advertising marketplace. And they became part of Libsyn as of June of 2021, which is kind of exciting and very awesome. We're so happy to have you here. So Dave's background is in starting and growing enterprise software companies. And like most of us that are here, kind of fell in love with podcasting. And he partnered with founder Trevor Smithlin to launch and grow AdvertiseCast. So this is why we're having him here. Now, this webinar, just before I'm like, Dave, go. This webinar is for people who are thinking of taking advertising, or maybe newer shows that are trying to figure out, like, are you ready for advertising, or maybe laying out the foundation of how to prepare yourself for the future. Maybe you just started and you just want to know what that is from the get-go. And we're also going to be talking about some general definitions so that you don't feel like, I don't know what this person is talking about when they're, when they start talking advertising speak. So we are definitely going to do that. Dave, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Elsie.
Yes, this is so exciting. All right, so let's start with the first question here. What do you say to people when they're like, how do you know podcasts are ready for advertising?
Yeah, I think, one of the key things that you definitely want to think about when you're looking to venture into the podcast advertising world is, you've actually spent enough time with your show to really develop that audience and develop kind of that relationship, so that, you're not just springing it on somebody, right away as soon as you start a podcast, even if you have some really good traction there. And I do think it makes sense to think about kind of easing it in, not necessarily adding, a bunch of ads, maybe all at once, kind of teasing a little bit, one at a time, and getting up to that point where maybe you're at kind of that max, ad load in your show. But really, when we talk to a podcast, and again, we're going to talk today about some of the different types of advertising, but, in this context, what I'm talking about is really like your host-read, host endorsement style, ads. And primarily where we see brands get interested in a show is when we get to, around that 5,000 to 10,000 downloads per episode within that first 30 days. And what that means is that when you release an episode today, by the whatever it is, the 19th of September, give or take, your episode's going to have, more than 5,000. Now, the other thing we're going to talk about a little bit is the concept of kind of episode-based advertising and, the capabilities of doing full catalog, based advertising, because there's some different approaches out there you can kind of work with to be able to get that scale where an advertiser really, becomes interested. And really what it comes down to is, it's not that, the shows that are under 5,000 are not, great and have, really engaged audiences and have a great connection and can really do some great things for the brand. Really, unfortunately, what it comes down to is that in this crazy world, podcast advertising, it takes effort. So an agency or a brand needs to spend time, engaging with the show, and putting together, talking points and setting up a promo code or whatever they need to do as part of that campaign. And kind of under that 5,000 level, the effort and, the potential outcome for the brand just sometimes doesn't make sense. And I talked about that 5,000 number. There certainly are shows that we have got advertisers for that are smaller than that 5K level, certain niche type of shows that have a very interesting or niche or very focused audience, you can actually monetize those quite well under that range. So as an example, you have a show that's geared towards dentists or nurses, or a very specific type of audience. We have seen some pretty good appetite from certain types of advertisers to tap into that specific, very, very niche audience, to reach that audience that they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of that, something that you really noted as well is the amount of like work involved in being able to have those advertisers come on too. As somebody who podcasts and as somebody who also has less than 5,000 downloads per episode per month, and somebody who has advertisers on their show, I do know that sometimes the conversations that we have are about the amount of extra labor that we're doing for our episodes for what amount of money, right? And we have an exchange of that, because sometimes something that everyday podcasters often forget is that whenever you do enter into an advertiser relationship, there is work involved, right? And I think you help manage that, and we're going to be talking a little bit about that later on. But for somebody who's just starting out and is kind of doing all the things, the ability for us to invest in our own business, we end up actually working in the business so much. And sometimes the result is getting a little bit of a paycheck, but sometimes it's not it's not worth it. So we've often passed on possible advertisers because the amount of work that's involved is just not something we're willing to put into at that time. Other relationships, absolutely, they work out. But if they can't kind of play in with the types of rates that we feel are good for us, sometimes we're like, I can't do it. It's too much job. It's too much of a job.
Exactly.
But anyway, there's a lot of folks that possibly, you'll have a very specific type of a business. AdvertiseCast is one specific type of a company. But maybe there are some people who want to manage this on their own, right? And what are some ways in which podcasts can pursue advertising on their own?
Yeah, I think when you kind of consider a show that maybe is ready to take on advertisers, often the first step is creating a bit of a call it media kit or one pager about your show. And I think the biggest mistake that we often see for someone who's just getting into this whole, advertising world is really they kind of revolve that information around what the show is all about and, some of the topics and things like that. But really what the potential advertisers are interested most in is who is your audience. Certainly, they do want to know what the show is about, what the content is all about. But I think the most important thing, and where the eyes of an ad buyer go to immediately when they get one of those documents from a podcaster, who's the audience? Is it male? Is it female? Is it certain age categories, income levels, education levels? And certainly there are challenges in terms of figuring out who your audience is. I know Libsyn has some great tools that you can use to actually put out an audience survey. And I would say that that's one of the biggest areas of preparation that we would recommend if you're getting to that level, you want to get to that level, is start understanding who your audience is as soon as humanly possible. Getting it out there and figuring out the basics of demographics, but also maybe some more custom type of questions like specific occupations or something that you think would be useful from an advertiser perspective to actually put down on that media kit. And then the other thing that a lot of people don't realize when they get into advertising is that there's a lot of work that, to put it, simply, there's a lot of work that ends up going nowhere. So what we see as, a company who literally does this every single day is that, we actually got into this business about 4 years ago. And at the time, a lot of the time we spent with brands and agencies was around educating them in terms of how this media works. So like, hey, here's how you do, talking points for a show. Here's what, different types of ads are available. Here's the ad links and formats and all that type of thing. And what we believed was that in a couple of years after that, people would kind of know the ins and outs of podcast advertising, and we wouldn't really have to explain it to them. Now, where we're at today is probably out of every 10 conversations that our team has on a weekly basis, probably 8 of those are still with brands or agencies that have never done this before. So what you actually end up doing is you end up spending a lot of time, educating and informing people that have never kind of dabbled in podcast advertising. So your typical kind of hit rate on, every 10 proposals you send out there is probably, 20, 25%, maybe 30% on the high side. So what that means is for a lot of podcasts who kind of want to do it on their own, as opposed to maybe working with a company, or a platform like AdvertiseCast, is spending 70 to 80% of your time on opportunities that don't go anywhere can become a little bit frustrating and a little bit of a drag on your time, especially when you're trying to, produce great content and engage with your audience and all those types of things. So that's kind of the big, the big draw that I would say for a lot of shows to maybe work with somebody like AdvertiseCast.
Yeah, it's so good. I have to say that just the percentages in terms of what you're seeing out there is so helpful for people to really go into this with eyes wide open, because we often think it's the solution to a problem, which it can be, right, in terms of monetization of a product, but what it actually takes in order for you to step into it. I find it so exciting to know that they're still like dealing with so many people who are interested and have zero idea as to what it is. I think that that's great because it just, it's room to grow.
Well, I think it certainly, it speaks volumes about kind of where we are as an industry. Like a lot of people say, everybody's got a podcast. We're at peak podcast. I still believe, and a lot of people believe, that we're still very early days. And, there's a lot of people that don't even know how to listen to a podcast yet that are coming in and starting to discover it. And I think there's a lot of upside for everybody, and certainly a lot of upside for new brands who want to come in and support, independent media and sponsor and advertise on podcasts. So.
It's so good. For my show, She Podcast, I'm just sharing this with you all over in the chat here. We do have a page, and even though there are media kits, which are one pagers that you can definitely send over to advertisers, and that level of preparation is just always so important, because you never know when somebody's going to randomly email you and go, hey, do you take sponsorship? And you're like, oh my gosh, so exciting. And you say yes. And then they go, could you give me your rates? And then you're like, oh my gosh. Oh no. And then it's this like running around trying to figure out what it is. And one of the ways in which we started to solve that problem for at least our show was just to create a page where we can send brands whenever they reach out to us, whether it's sponsorship, partnerships, and things like that, they can very easily have this page, scan exactly what Dave was talking about, because my partner Jessica is constantly telling me, and everybody around her is like, we're not selling our show, we're selling our audience. And that's what advertisers are trying to reach. And that's a completely different conversation, just like Dave said. So unfortunately, it doesn't really matter how amazing your show is. That's absolutely bonus, but it's about who are you going to be reaching when it comes to that stuff. And we have found that, at least for us, maybe the survey thing that he said, it's hard sometimes to get folks to take a survey. But if you do have an online presence, sometimes Instagram has some great demographics. We run a very large Facebook group, which is for us a lovely asset. So we often look at the demographics of the Facebook group itself. We get some data from that as well. So we do have the opportunity to pull that data from a variety of different places. And we coalesce that to really give you an imprint of who our audience is. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh my gosh, I don't know where I'm going to get it. At first you get scrappy. You figure out how to find out who your audience is, and you continue that relationship moving back and forth. It just has to be that. One thing too, just to add to the value that Dave offered too, is the fact that if you are truly 100% into advertising and you want to do this on your own, okay, you do need to also add in your sort of in the way that you are creating your content, you have to build in time where you're going to be doing outreach, where you're going to be doing sales, where you're going to be working on the plans of how you're going to sell advertising on your show. That has to be as important as you recording your show, as you putting your show notes up, as you putting it up. Like you have to start to build it in there, because when you have that set up, when you're ready to work with somebody like AdvertiseCast, you already have a system, you already have all of the stuff going on, and you know what to expect and the amount of work that it's going to take. So because there is that extra layer of having to do the actual work of adding, I know it seems bizarre, but it actually is work to add the sponsorship spots into your show. That's another part that a lot of people don't pay attention to.
Yeah.
So we are, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Elsie, the other thing that I think a lot of people underestimate too is there's a fair amount of kind of other administrative work that goes along with the advertising workflow. So for example, you may, secure an advertiser for, 3 episodes over the course of the next several weeks, but you're going to probably have multiple versions of the ad copy coming over that you actually need to review, do a new ad read. You're going to need to maybe provide some reporting to the advertiser around, when the ads were delivered, the number of downloads they received. You're then going to need to invoice the advertiser to actually get paid. So actually doing the accounting piece, and then later on following up with the advertiser in case they, kind of haven't paid you. So all that kind of back end stuff, it just, adds to kind of some of the overhead. And again, that's, why I think the solution that we've put together for podcasters is really compelling, because we just take all that stuff off your plate, let you do your thing, and we handle all of that stuff on the back end. So I think that's kind of my shameless pitch for why AdvertiseCast is so great. But just to let let everybody kind of set their expectations that it's more than just talking about a product and getting a check in the mail. There is certainly a lot more to it than that in the process.
Oh, absolutely. And so you've already been talking about this. Like, what if you don't want to do it on your own? And I think let's go ahead and break that down a little bit more, because obviously you do have a business that does this, but can you break down a little bit more as to, I've heard, everything that has to do with organization and follow up and like just the general productivity system, if you will, of having to do that. What are other things that can be, somebody like AdvertiseCast can be helpful to be able to really have people, if you don't want to do it on your own, if this feels like, oh my God, it's just too much already.
Yeah, I think really, the way we view our platform and our company is that we're here to kind of take the pain away in terms of managing this whole process, and just starting from the very beginning and working through as a podcaster on the AdvertiseCast platform. You get essentially email alerts from our team whenever there's an opportunity that they want to include your show in. So, for example, you're sitting there and you get an email saying, hey, HelloFresh wants to work with your show, or BetterHelp wants to work with your show. Those are really kind of like what we call brand vetting requests that you as a show can look at them and say, hey, you know what, I really would like to work with that brand. Or, yeah, you know what, I don't want to work with that brand. I don't want to work with ButcherBox because I'm a vegan, for example. Right. So you can certainly review those, give us an idea of kind of what your appetite is. So it's not like you're just sitting there and we're saying, hey, read this ad. Like, it is very much so, up to you as a creator, what type of brands do you actually want to work with? So that's kind of step one. After that, when the actual, buyer is interested in picking up some ad spots, having a really organized calendar is super important. So there's a feature in our system where you can manage your calendar, manage, all of the available ad spots, what advertisers are going in, what dates and what positions in your show, meaning, are they going to be in a pre-roll or a mid-roll type of, position? Having that calendar really helps us as a sales team figure out, what's available on this show, and actually presenting the upcoming availabilities. Advertisers are, very kind of schedule sensitive. There's some nuances to how media is actually purchased, and without getting into too much complexity, there's actually like a specific broadcast calendar versus like a calendar, normal monthly calendar. So there's like certain things depending on which day of the week it falls, and all that kind of nuance that the system helps you manage. Obviously, there's then reviewing the ad copy, doing the ad read. From the podcaster perspective, it's very important to look at within that ad read, like what are the absolute must mention pieces, what are the things they absolutely don't want you to say. Very often there will be some of those, like, hey, please don't mention this type, a competitor of ours when you're talking about our product, as an example, or different things they kind of want you to shy away from. But then it is all about, we always say the more authentic the better. Very oftentimes you will receive product. So that's something that our platform and our team, helps facilitate, is getting the addresses over to the advertiser so they can ship you, a box of food so you can try it, or whatever the product might be. Once you're ready to do the ads, obviously there's, multiple versions of ad copy that might have come through the system for various dates. Once the spots get published, you mark those complete. Within the system, we also manage, reporting. So for example, if your show does, 5,000 downloads per episode, in 30 days, you get a notification asking for that reporting to see what the actual numbers were. Because we're basically telling the advertiser, hey, here's what you can expect. Very often it comes in well over that, because we like to be conservative in terms of those numbers. Sometimes it comes in under. If it comes in under, sometimes we do have a process where we have to, do what we call a make good in the industry. So you run another spot at no cost to kind of make up for that shortfall in the actual delivery. Maybe it's in the summertime and you got below average listenership, or maybe it was like an off week or something like that. So that happens, but not too often. And then after that, it comes down to really, we handle the billing. And then the podcaster essentially has the decision whether they want to get their payouts in PayPal or in their bank account, and those get processed, and the wheels keep, turning in motion throughout, how many ever ad spots you have booked, and just that process just keeps repeating itself. So there's lots behind the scenes, but that's kind of from a user's perspective, kind of what you can expect.
This is gold, people. So listen, if you're ready, like, we're going to talk about all this stuff when it comes to AdvertiseCast specifically here as we move forward. But what I want you to do, for everybody who's listening here, if you haven't already, or maybe you're watching this on the replay, is to actually just listen back to what Dave just talked through, the entire system. There are ways that you can set up that system for yourself. In fact, just coming in with eyes open to see, like, you have to do outreach, you have to do follow-up, you have to do invoicing, you have to do the ability to understand what the copy is, being able to follow up what exactly the copy is with the advertisers. Everything he just mentioned, you can do that and build that on your own. So it's not like you're powerless to be able to manage something like this, but you have to understand that it is a lift, and it is something, I know for me, even just thinking about getting my show notes together to record a show is like, oh my God. If I had to deal with having this other stuff, it's a lot. So just to let you know, that is gold for you to sit down and like check some of that stuff down. Now, let's talk about money. Let's talk about, I know that you have something built for this, but I'd love to know, how much can a podcaster make from advertising?
Yeah. Again, a lot of this is really dependent on the size of the audience, because the way the industry thinks about, ad costs is basically on a CPM model. And, we'll kind of get into more about that later, but CPM is basically, cost per 1,000 downloads. So for example, if you've got a show that does 10,000 downloads per episode, within the first 30 days that it's released, the typical kind of like run-of-the-mill average middle of the road CPM is about $25. So when you think about that, you're looking at about, say, for a show at 10K, downloads per episode, we're looking at about $250 per spot.
Mhm.
And then we kind of look at, well, how many ad spots can you do in any given episode? Partially, it depends on how long your show is.
Right.
Obviously, you can fit more ads comfortably in an hour and a half show than you can a 15-minute show. But we always kind of look at, if you're probably, say, call it an hour, give or take, you're probably around 3. You may be able to creep that up a little bit higher to 4. Anything like around half an hour or less, you're probably looking at about 2 ad spots.
Yeah.
So just take that, number of the listenership. So say 10,000. Take 10 times that $25 CPM, multiply by the number of ad spots that you think you can fit in your show comfortably, times how many episodes you do in a year, and there's your kind of expected dollars. Now,
Right.
there is a really great template that we have on our website that you can actually go and punch in some numbers, and I think we can pop that into the chat here, and it just gives you a way to say, hey, let's put in all these parameters and kind of see what it comes out to be. And certainly, obviously, the big point of leverage there is as your show grows, that number just keeps going up, right? So when you go from 10 to 15 to 20,000, that number just keeps scaling up. So, that's kind of the key leverage point. Now that $25 CPM too is, again, that's the average. There certainly are shows that charge, more and substantially more than that. I talked before about some very niche audiences, like, we have shows that are geared towards, B2B marketers that charge way beyond, $25 CPMs, because that's a very desirable audience. And there's brands out there that are really trying to reach those types of people. So that's another piece where if you do have that type of audience, that's something you can definitely, increase. But if you're talking about kind of a, standard, audience show, comedy, sports, kind of your typical topics, you're probably in and around that $25 CPM range, give or take.
Yeah, for sure. And then now let's go ahead and start chatting a little bit about definitions. And we already talked a little bit more about CPM. I don't know if you wanna address CPM a little bit more, just so that we can break down a little bit of the jargon and folks really understand what that
Oh,
is.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, the one thing about this industry, and frankly, a lot of industries, is that we have our jargon.
Yeah.
And even when I got into the advertising industry, 4+ years ago, I came from a totally different industry. And, people would throw around these different acronyms and terminology, and I'd just go, yeah, sounds good. And I'd go and like Google it and figure out, what this meant, and then get back to them. But there's a few things that just like the kind of the basics you should know. So we talked about CPM. It's cost per mil, which is cost per 1,000 downloads. And that's really, that's how we set the rate. And so when you think about, you have a show at 10,000, if you had $25 CPM, it's $250 a spot. If the show increases to 20,000, you use the same CPM, and now you're at $500 a spot. So it just kind of scales up typically with the audience size. There are certainly instances where we change the CPM. Maybe we go up in a certain case where, the show is really doing a great job. Advertisers are really pleased. It's driving great results, and there's a lot of demand. So we just look at it from a supply and demand perspective. Sometimes if there's a lot of demand for a show, well, the price is going to go up a little bit. Maybe not dramatically, but we'll definitely increase it. A couple other things that come up, quite often, people will talk about the difference between a baked in ad and a dynamically inserted ad. Essentially, when you think about baked in, it's like your kind of typical type of ad that would happen, 10 years ago, where there was no dynamic insertion technology. It's you're doing your episode, you're talking about last night's, football game, and then you just start talking about DraftKings. You just go right into the ad. The ad is there in that episode, in the audio, really forever, for as long as you have that episode up, unless you somehow go in there and manually take it out. So early days in the podcast space, that was really great for advertisers because essentially, as I mentioned before, we measure on a 30-day period saying how many downloads does your show get on an episode within 30 days. Now, if there's a genre that gets a lot of people listening to those episodes past that 30-day point, that becomes really great for the advertiser because you get 10,000 downloads in 30 days. And then by the time you're at 90 days, maybe there's another 4,000. And so the way you can think about that is great value for the advertiser, but there's kind of some downsides to that. Number one, you as a show weren't able to monetize those extra 4,000 downloads. Now, the good news is the advertiser is really happy. They're probably going to come back and renew with you if they got really good results. But the other downside is for the advertiser, maybe that ad was about the Black Friday sale. And you're now well past that Black Friday, and it makes no sense for that ad to be in your episode anymore. So that's kind of your baked in type of format. Definitely today, there's certainly lots of that still going on. I would say, close to half or more of what's happening out in the industry is still baked in. And then on the flip side, when you think about dynamic ad insertion, some people call it dynamic insertion, DI, or dynamic ad insertion, DAI. Really what that means is, generally speaking, the ads will be recorded separately by the show, by the host. They're inserted into the episodes at certain points. From the listener's perspective, very often they don't even realize that this is something that was recorded separately. It just kind of meshes in with the content. I mean, sometimes there's a delineation between the content and the ad, but the big difference is those ads are only there either for a certain number of downloads or for a certain amount of time. So they can be taken out after 30 days, or once they hit the 10,000, they get removed from the content. And that's kind of like something that's emerged over the last several years. A lot of platforms, have those capabilities to do dynamic ad insertion. The big benefit, I think, from a podcaster's perspective is if you have a large percentage of your downloads on episodes that are older than 30 days, dynamic ad insertion allows you to monetize those. Right. So for example, there's people out there that have true crime shows. They get 10,000 downloads an episode. They do 4 episodes a month. And it might look like, they get 40,000 downloads-ish on those new episodes, but they get 100,000 total. And you're thinking, well, where the heck do those other 60,000 come from? They come from all the old episodes that people are finding and listening to. And we work with some shows like, they get 70% of their downloads on their older episodes. So that dynamic insertion technology allows you to take advantage of that and really monetize that entire catalog.
Yeah, that's really good. And you also have to be, again, you have to be very clear about the type of consumption that you're doing and the type of show that you have, because the shows that I have, are not those types of shows. Like my show, and at least in terms of the podcasting shows that I have, are not those types of shows. They are of the moment. If I were to listen to a really old show, I mean, if I really liked the people, I'd listen. But for the most part, there's really not that much value because it's so much of the moment. I do have a yoga, I have a yoga podcast show, which I think would actually benefit for something like that. I'm still I stopped producing that show in 2013. It's just sitting there and people are still downloading those shows, those episodes, because they are engaging with this content that never, it never stops. It's just classics that people can listen to. So you do have to have, that ability for you to understand your content and what it actually does.
For sure.
So Dave,
there's little benefit to doing, leveraging dynamic insertion when you have a show that's sports or news, where literally people are listening to the episodes for 2 days and then it's kind of, it's kind of old at that point.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask if there is a difference, and I don't know if you want to talk about this, but what you were talking about pricing before when it came to the CPM model, but is there anything that changes in terms of pricing when somebody is monetizing their back catalog versus their latest episode, or is it all the same?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the way that ad buyers think about it is that the baked in ads have, more value. So they don't mind paying a little bit of a premium for that. As I mentioned the example before, if they get that 10,000 within 30 days and they end up getting an extra 3 or 4,000 over the course of the next few
Right.
months, they kind of know that, right? On the
Yeah.
dynamic side, they're not getting that added value. So in a lot of cases, they do expect a slightly lower rate from the show. Now, with that being said, in the example that I talked about earlier, where if today you've got 4 episodes at 10,000, but you're not doing anything with that 60,000 downloads of your back catalog, if you can open up monetization for that, and even if the rate across the board has to be a little bit lower, like overall, it's going to end up being a net positive.
That's true. That is true. What
Mm-hmm.
does, as we're sticking to one of the last terms to address sort of here through definitions, it's like, what does programmatic mean within the
Mm-hmm.
context of advertising?
Yeah. So, I mean, the primary kind of ad format or the predominant ad format for many years in podcasting has been the host read ad. What's happened over the last several years is that there's been an emergence of kind of, you can call it programmatic. We tend to refer to it as more like audience buying. So really now there's
Mm,
platforms that advertisers can use to say, hey, I don't really care what podcast this ad shows up on, but I want to target sports podcasts, or I want to target podcasts that skew male or female, or different interests. And those are primarily not host-read ads; they're pre-recorded. And there's several platforms that you can basically, as a podcaster, say, you know what, I'm going to kind of opt into this, programmatic approach. The ads will get placed on your show, and you basically don't do anything, and you get paid.
mm,
Now, certainly, you get paid a little bit less because you're not putting that, kind of effort forward in terms of all of the, the nuances of the host read. But this is something that definitely is emerging in the industry. And it's great for not only shows that maybe haven't hit that threshold yet, but also a lot of shows use it for, hey, I do host read ads, but I usually sell 70% of them. Maybe that 30% you can open up for those, those kind of pre-produced ads that are going to get inserted by various platforms. And that's something that you're definitely going to see more of in the industry going forward. It's not for everybody, but some people like it because there's little to no effort,
yeah.
and you can essentially monetize. And there are some controls in terms of saying, you know what, there's categories. I'm fine with these 46 categories, but I don't want to have these 3 or 4 categories showing up at my show, because I don't want
Right.
ads for alcohol brands or something like that. So there's some
Yeah,
control there.
for sure. Absolutely. All right. So let's pretend that you got advertising, right? Let's say you got it. You have your person. So how do you keep advertisers happy? Because that's something that I think a lot of us often overlook. How do you keep that
Yeah,
conversation, that partnership going?
I think the most successful podcasts that we work with from an advertising perspective are those that get creative with their ad reads, that ask for and take feedback well from their
Mm,
advertising partners, and just kind of really go above and beyond. So, for example, you have kind of a decision when you're going to do your ad reads. You can just kind of sit there and read the talking points, or you can have fun with it and be, engaging, because keep in mind, people have, that little skip button that they can hit if it's obviously an ad and it's boring and they don't want to hear about, your advertiser. But the best shows weave it into their content and their personality, and just really make it engaging and make it part of the show. And I think that's my number one tip in terms of keeping your advertisers really happy. And what's going to happen there, when you make it part of the content, you keep it fun and you keep your audience engaged, that's going to translate to them supporting those advertisers, checking out the website, buying the products, and that is going to keep you having advertisers knocking at your door. So and also, just like I said, if you're going to put out your show notes, make sure the link to the advertisers in the show notes. If you're going to put a tweet out about your new episode, you know, put that link in there and thank the sponsors. Anything you can do that's extra that really shows the sponsors and advertisers that you are going above and beyond and you really appreciate, their partnership, that's going to speak volumes and it's going to translate to, lots and lots of demand for your show.
Oh, we love that. And I know that I've been sold on stuff like that where there's somebody who's bought, like, I know that there's been an advertiser that's gone out there, has bought all these podcasts, but then the one show does such a fantastic job selling them that usually that's why I buy, when they're like, oh, wow, I never thought about using X product to do that. That completely speaks to me. So yes, absolutely. And it works so well. Advertisers love that. We do have a lot of conversation in there that they're like, we're ready. We what are the next steps with AdvertiseCast when it comes to like some folks getting excited. And then I promise y'all, we're going into the Q&A here right after that. So for those who want to work with AdvertiseCast, what's next?
Yeah, I mean, I think if everybody else sees the little green button that I see right under Elsie and my faces, apply to work with AdvertiseCast, that's, kind of a step you can take. Go there, check out. That's kind of a bunch of questions that we ask in terms of, capturing information on your show. And we kind of use that as the kind of the first step in the process. There's also a link that I think we can put into the chat here where it just gives you, more information on what it looks like to work with us. And certainly if you have any questions at all, I mean, you can just email hello@advertisecast.com and, we'll get back to you and answer whatever questions you have.
Yeah, very, very cool. All right. So we are going to go ahead and dive into some of these questions and answers. And it seems like we might have answered this first question here, but we can reiterate a little bit more here from two different perspectives here, Dave. This is from Steven, and he asks, how do I get detailed demographic data on listeners, the kind that advertisers want to see, age, gender, income, education, etc.? I was asked for these recently and didn't know where to look.
Yeah, I think we touched on this a bit earlier. So Libsyn has some tools that you can actually use to put out an audience survey. I think that's number one. Elsie, you know more about that than I do. And then there's also some ways that you can, if you have, say, for example, a lot of your listeners are following you on social media, there are some tools out there that you can use to kind of see the demographic breakdown of a social media following, and you can kind of use that as a bit of a proxy. And I think a lot of it is just engaging with your audience and, asking about them and, tell me about yourself, why do you listen to the show? And kind of figuring out, who's really listening there. So Elsie, maybe you can comment a little bit more about the audience survey.
We do have a survey. I would say for you to email rob@libsyn.com and he can give you the scoop as to how to do it for your show. Now, Edison Research actually just came up with a really wonderful template, and it's linked inside the chat as well. That actually has a lot more questions than the Libsyn survey has. I personally find that template to be really wonderful as a way for you to really reach out to your audience, which is a really great tool. But as Dave said, like coming from somebody who's constantly looking at who our demographics are, who our audience is and whatnot, anytime that you touch base with your audience, looking at your Facebook page demographics, looking at Instagram, looking at Twitter, looking at your email newsletter, people who are opting into that kind of a behavior. I know it's a little bit challenging sometimes to be able to coalesce that data and especially see if are they actually listening to my show or not listening to my show, but you can start to see an overview of what that looks like for you. Anybody who attends things like this, like if you ever have a webinar, this is really a lovely way to start to get some data too, is there are some other third-party services that give you a little bit more information on the people that sign up. That's another way that you're able to do it. We have a text chat it's like a texting service for She Podcast. It's called Community. And whenever you sign up to get our text messages, it actually gives you so much data. It's crazy. It gives us gender data and demographic data and age. And there's all of this stuff that's broken down, location, geographic, and I'm able to see all of those things. Also, if you're looking at the, even though in our stats inside of Libsyn, you do not get any gender or any of that stuff at all inside of those stats. You do get geographic information, and you do get the kind of information of like how people are consuming your content, meaning are you heavily skewed towards a Spotify audience, and is Spotify where people are mostly listening to your show? You can actually look at that data within Spotify, because they actually do give you that data. So there are some platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcasts and even Google Podcasts that do have more data when it comes to the people who are consuming it. It's not in one place, because podcast hosting platforms just don't get that. Like, that's very it's for those other specific people. You have to log into them, and you are going to have to do a little bit of the legwork when it comes to bringing that in. But that's a good way to start to see patterns and you can really get a sense of the truth around what your podcast is. YouTube, same thing with YouTube as well. All of these people give you information. So I hope that was helpful. I know it's a little bit of a pull, but I don't think anybody has like a turn the light on solution. Nobody really does
Not
that.
yet.
And I think that we've answered this before, but I'm sure that there's been a question here, but this is an answer to how many downloads per month you need to use to AdvertiseCast. And then Christopher asks that question.
Yeah, what we generally look at is, a minimum of 5K per episode, or, around 20,000 a month, because that, evens out to, if we're looking at like a full catalog basis.
Good. And let's see, what about CPMs for more specific targeted audiences? Clint asks about that. I'm assuming he's thinking of price points, right? If it's like, throw out some CPM numbers that you've seen for niche stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, some shows that are maybe more B2B focused. Like, we have some shows for marketers and, startup executives and entrepreneurs that are, $50, $100 CPMs. And, brands are more than happy to pay that in some cases, because it's a very specific audience they're looking to reach. So think about that. It's really, are there advertisers out there that are, paying really good money elsewhere to reach that same audience? Are they going to really expensive trade shows, or are they, taking out magazine ads and trade publications to hit, that type of audience that you have? And then that's something that you can kind of use to say, well, if they're willing to spend those kind of dollars, our show has that audience, and I think we could charge, a bit of a premium there.
For sure. Kayla asks, in the 5 to 10K download in 30-day range, how much money would be reasonable to expect per episode?
Yeah, again, it really boils down to, if you take that CPM times the audience, whether it's 5, 10,000, and then the length of your show and how many ad spots you're kind of comfortable putting in there. So, you've got, say, an hour show, maybe you can fit, 3 ad spots comfortably in there and not feel like you're spending most of your time talking about, products to your audience. And then, check out that calculator we've got on our site, and that'll allow you to crunch some numbers there to figure out what the potential is.
Right. And also, just to thinking about it from the perspective of when things are like, there's a lot of advertisers that are looking to invest, and then there's sometimes that there aren't as many. So there are sometimes, like, maybe you have like one quarter where you sell out and you have 3 ads per show, and then all of a sudden, for 6 months, it's 1. And so you have to kind of gauge, and you won't even know what that feels like until you're in it. Right. And so sometimes that fluctuation of the income that you might expect, it really is, it's like a ebb and flow a lot of the time. And then, I know one of our fellow podcasters who, she has a very niche show. She's very, very specific. And because of the fact that it's so niche, she's able to sell out the year. And as she does that, then she's able to then kind of figure that out. But mind you, she pursues it really, really hard and just wants to sell out. And she's able to do that because of the focus of her podcast.
Yeah, and
Now,
I would say,
yes, go ahead.
Elsie, a couple other considerations there, because I think, if you're sitting there going, hey, well, I don't have 5,000, but I do have, other things that I can add. I have an email list, I have a social media, I have this, I have that. If that's the case where you're kind of not at that pure podcast threshold, but you can kind of
Hmm.
package that all together for an advertiser or brand to say, hey, look, we've got this audience, here's the different channels that we reach that audience. Putting that together as a kind of a sponsorship package, that definitely would be a really good way kind of early on to at least give some good scale, put a package together, and get some interest that way in sponsoring the show.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm going to look at some of these questions, and unfortunately, folks, I do see a lot of like sort of marketing and audience growth questions in there. And I absolutely know that this is something that a lot of people really want to know. And I feel that the scope of this, especially as we're coming to an end here, is a little bit too much for us to address. So I'm not going to do that, but we are going to plan on something that can be a little bit more specific. Folks that are in the chat, my lovely Libsyn team, maybe we can share some appropriate webinars that we've covered that are in aspects of audience growth that we can really put in there, and they can definitely check that out. Here is a question, I think, Dave, that maybe we can go ahead and address. This is, what are AdvertiseCasts rates? Do you get a percentage of ad revenue? Also, do you handle all of the invoicing, advertising, communications?
Yes, so we do take a cut because we are a business. So the way our standard arrangement works is that for all ad buys that we facilitate through our platform for your show, we take 30%. And really that covers everything from, we've got our sales team out there, presenting your show. We are, handling all the ad operations, making sure you get all the ad copy, making sure those air checks all come through, doing the invoicing to the advertiser, sending the money over to your PayPal or your bank account. And then basically what happens is if it's it's $1,000 ad buy, you basically end up getting that 700 into your account, and then we retain that 30%. Now the other piece to the equation is that there are some ad buyers that pay a little slowly, meaning that it can be 90, 120 days, sometimes longer. We've had invoices kind of stretch out past that.
Mm.
So we actually, in some cases will front those payouts to the podcaster, even though we're still waiting to get paid by the advertiser. Because obviously a lot of these advertisers we work with quite a bit. We know that their invoice processing times take a while, but that's just kind of one of the other benefits, is that, we can basically, kind of help that cash flow from the podcaster's perspective, as opposed to having to wait for all those invoices to come in.
That's good to know. That's good to know. I have here's one question that I think is a really good one. I believe I understand what Bill is asking here. He asks, when using an advertising provider, can you avoid certain companies? For example, that they may compete or have a different set of values than your audience. So I'm assuming it's that thing about, you're like a vegan and you don't want to take a meat company.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, for sure. As I think I mentioned earlier, it's all completely opt-in from the podcaster's perspective. So when those brand vetting requests come over, it's totally up to you to accept or reject, that opportunity. So if it's something that comes over that doesn't meet your, values, or you just don't like the product or the brand, you can totally decline that. The other thing that definitely is something that our platform helps manage is that conflict. So, certainly if you're advertising for HelloFresh and, Blue Apron comes along, the advertiser doesn't want that. And often that's actually in their agreement that they don't want that conflict. So we'll help manage that. But obviously from the show's perspective, it makes sense for you. You don't want to one day talk about this brand, and the next day you're talking about their competitor. So that's something that definitely comes into play, and we help manage that too.
That's great. Clark asks, he says, beyond what has been mentioned, how do you make podcasts more attractive to AdvertiseCast? How to make your job easier, Dave?
Yeah, honestly, I think certainly we look at your audience, how engaged they are. The size of the audience is important. But I think one of the biggest things in terms of, if you look at the really successful shows that monetize, really well, that work with AdvertiseCast, it's those people who are very responsive and get back to us as soon as possible on any opportunities. So for example, you get one of those brand vetting requests, jump on it right away, because to be honest, some of this stuff moves pretty quick. So we have a buyer come and say, it's end of the month, I got to get rid of some of this budget. What do you have? We'll put that out to 15 shows. Sometimes it's like, now, and I have to get back to them by the end of the day. So if somebody gets in their email response tomorrow at 2, like the opportunity might already be gone.
Right.
So it's just being really responsive, engaging with our team, asking questions. If a brand comes over that you're not quite sure about, ask our team. They'll tell you more about it. And that's what we love. We love just having great communications with our, podcast partners. And that's what really helps drive, more ad dollars your way.
That's great. I think that we are now running out of time here. I know we see a lot of different questions in there. I do have one more question for you that I think comes up a lot, and it might be a little helpful, and then we'll wrap it up here. And it's this one from Tyler, where he asks, hello, do you find that it is more difficult to find advertisers that are willing to work with a podcast that has mature or adult content? For example, a true crime podcast that talks about sensitive topics. Thanks.
Really the way we think about it, and from our experience, if you have like explicit, meaning that, there's some curse words in the content, or maybe it's, it's true crime, you're talking about some things that are a little bit, gruesome, that might reduce your, advertiser appetite by 5 to 10%. But there's lots of advertisers out there advertising on, shows that have explicit content. Lots of advertisers advertised on cereal, which, that had some, kind of adult, kind of a little bit more sensitive type content. So definitely a little bit, but not much. Certainly if a show has, very over the top, content or borders on offensive, then definitely, because you can imagine as a brand, you're conscious of where your, messaging is out there. And that's something that would limit you for sure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think we are going to wrap it up. I had a comment on the gear and all of that stuff. I'm really just using a Shure MV7 microphone, which is both USB and XLR. And I just have a C920 Logitech camera. So, and a ring light. That's what I'm using. It's fairly simple. I think, Dave, you're keeping it real simple.
I am less sophisticated. My mic is actually in my closet right now. I don't have it set up, and I'm using AirPods and a Mac camera. I had a camera issue where my camera was like messing up my computer. So I'm basic. I'm a sales guy, so I don't have.
It can be done, people.
Stuff that Elsie does.
It can be done. You could just get the work out. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for showing up here. I do believe we have all the ways to connect with the Advertise team, often like in the chat, inside of that little like green box there. Do reach out to them. And also follow Libsyn on all of social so that you can get updated and you can see all the stuff that comes out that way. We are LIBSYN and almost everywhere: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the places. And after we're done here, I would suggest go back and re-listen, write some notes as if like we're talking specifically to you, set up a plan. If you feel that you're not ready for AdvertiseCast yet, or you feel like a little defeated that you don't have all the downloads, that you need to start preparing for the opportunity to be able to do this. There's nothing that helps your podcast more than to pretend as if, which is something that my partner Jessica and I for She Podcast did for so long, where it's like we believed in our product, we believe in what we're putting out. We started to prepare to be able to say yes to advertisers, and we had all of the bits all set up. You have to start to take action. Do not get defeated with the fact that you don't have the download numbers maybe at this time. Audience will grow. You have to stay steady, and at the first time, you gotta get like creative when it comes to doing outreach. But you gotta get all your ducks in a row. People are going to be requesting things for you. Anyway, thank you so much for showing up today, and you'll see us here next month with another lovely webinar. We don't really know exactly what it's going to be just yet, but it's going to be fantastic. So thank you so much, and thank you, Dave, for your time today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming.
Awesome.